I know that this is highly unrealistic, but let us assume that Hungary gets to keep their pre-Trianon borders, looking like so in the interwar period, so let us see what would change. As you would know, most of these territories were not Hungarian majority, as shown with this map. Since I had already made a video where Hungary joined the Entente, and even then they didn't manage to keep their full imperial borders, the narrative of the video would be very unrealistic. This is because Serbia and Romania wanted to expand greatly, while Hungary was a defeated power after the Great War. In 1918 they had lost most of their territory, however they demilitarized and demobilized because of Woodrow Wilson of America, who had promised them fair plebiscites in the disputed areas, which the Hungarians assumed that they would win, as most of these territories were part of Hungary for centuries. The problem is that this didn't happen. The Entente encroached on the Hungarian territory and the Hungarian government collapsed, being taken over by the communists that declared a Soviet republic and fought almost all of their neighboring countries, and then they were defeated and Hungary got Trianoned. So how do we change it and what the implications would be? Well, I think that the full pre-Trianon borders would be a stretch, however we can still use the same borders. Let us assume that the Hungarian Soviet Republic still rises to power earlier and is more destructive, which would create more resentment in their neighboring countries. As such, when it is inevitably defeated, I think that we would end up with these borders, with Hungary keeping their pre-Trianon imperial territory, a great victory for the Hungarians. This would happen in the year of 1920, and at the same time the Far Eastern Republic still existed before the Soviet Union had conquered it. I think that if Hungary were not to go socialist like they did historically, which by the way is highly unrealistic, not plausible and not realistic, this would make the Soviet Union slightly weaker. Oh, did I mention it was unrealistic? Yeah, so I think that the Far Eastern Republic was doomed to fail, however it did comprise of territories of Green Ukraine, which I can see as breaking away. Eventually Japan would be forced out of Russia, and this would be ideal for Green Ukraine, because this would allow them to fill in the power vacuum and expand into the Far Eastern Republic, basically annexing it. All of this happened because Hungary got to keep their pre-Trianon borders, which yes is unrealistic, and I want to mention this in case I hadn't already. With a stronger Hungary, I think it's fair to assume that the United Kingdom would be thrown into a recession, which they would resolve by sailing Zanzibar back to Oman. Then they would have a war of about 25 minutes and retake it once again. America would also be in a poor position, and with Mexico being a failed state right next door, they very well might invade the country as to secure southern Baja California. However, the Navajo natives would not like the American military presence in their indigenous territory, so I think it's very plausible and realistic that they would separate themselves, followed next by the state of Denver. This would undoubtedly change the United States election of 1920, where historically it was a sweep for Warren G. Harding, and his opponent James N. Cox had lost. However, with the changes we have made, specifically Omani Zanzibar and Green Ukraine, I think that there would be some noticeable changes in this election. Maybe it's unrealistic to assume, however, James N. Cox was an interesting candidate. His running mate was a certain Franklin D. Roosevelt, and he is known as one of the best American presidents. This I think would boost the chances of the Democrats, and what we would see in the 1920 presidential election would be a tie between the two candidates. As a fun fact, both of them were from Ohio, so the people from this state would be winning regardless no matter what, as the president would be from their home state. I'm really unsure what would happen in this scenario, however I think that both presidential candidates would agree to make Columbus, Ohio, the capital of the United States of America. In all reality, Ohio would begin to dominate American politics, and with the Navajo and the state of Denver leaving, there wouldn't be so much opposition to this. Since the capital is now Columbus and the 1920 presidential election is a tiebreaker, I think that there is only one solution that would end this deadlock. Clearly, both candidates are not popular enough to run the country. As such, I think that Christopher Columbus would be reincarnated and become the 29th president of the United States. Now you may say that this is unrealistic because the world back in the 1920s had no technology of bringing back the dead, unlike today. What primitive technology they had in the 1920s was artificial intelligence. I think that with Christopher Columbus being dead, the Americans would find all of his records, interview his relatives and so on, basically creating President AI. America would be the first country to fall to artificial intelligence. As you would know, in alternate history every event is connected. Hungary keeping Transylvania obviously leads to the invention of artificial intelligence. I know that this may sound unrealistic, but with all of the changes we have made, it's not just America, but the world as a whole, so I can see it as plausible. This would have several butterfly effects that I want to explore, most of which would be in the Soviet Union. Not only have they lost the Far East to Green Ukraine, but also with America invading Mexico and getting southern Baja California, the Mexican state would be destroyed. A big butterfly effect would be that Lionel Trotsky likely doesn't move to Mexico like he did historically. He would have two options: go to Argentina and become a football player, or stay in the Soviet Union, trying to challenge Stalin as to assume power. Speaking of, I would assume that you have already subscribed to the channel, because you're a really good person that loves history. I don't even have to ask you to subscribe. I assume that you have already done so. If not, this may be unrealistic, but please subscribe. Now back to the video. So what does Leonel Trotsky do? Well, let us be realistic. Due to Green Ukraine existing, there is no chance of him ruling the Soviet Union. He wouldn't go to Argentina either, as this is not his main ideology. I think that he would assume the leadership of the Soviet Union, but for this to happen, Stalin needs to be out of the picture. Now some people may say that this is unrealistic, and to them I say, well yes, but actually no. As you would know, Stalin was born in Georgia. However, with Green Ukraine and Pre-Trianon Hungary, not to speak of Oman being stronger as they would have the Zanzibar Islands, I think that Stalin's parents would decide to emigrate to America, and specifically to the state of Georgia. This way, Stalin is still born in Georgia, and we have not made any drastic changes to the world, so it is still highly realistic, but also Trotsky can assume power of the Soviet Union. The thing about Stalin this time being born in Georgia is that the American government under Christopher Columbus would not be so accepting of this, mostly fearing overpopulation. I think that what is likely is that they would force Stalin's parents to switch places with somebody else. Due to racism in the 1920s, I think that an African-American couple would be forced to move out of American Georgia and go to European Georgia. This African-American couple would be picked randomly and off they go to Georgia. With that, these are all the geopolitical changes in the year of 1920, however there would be much more to cover in the interwar period. First up, does Italy go fascist? Well, I already made a video where they go communist, so given the circumstances, I would say that this cannot happen. And trust me, I'm very smart and well educated. You need to consume my content unconditionally, as I'm purposefully feeding you propaganda. Anyways, it may sound a little unrealistic, however I doubt that Italy would go fascist or communist. So do they remain democratic? Well, I'm also unsure about this. Italy after the Third World War was not in a very good position. Economically they were destroyed. I'm finding it very difficult to see what would happen to Italy. However, in the earlier mentioned video where they go communist, the US of Z wrote this comment and I replied as such. I think that everyone can agree that if Italy were so devastated after the war, they should have just joined Switzerland to be better off. In this alternate history, I think that this would be the case, mostly because of Christopher Columbus, who, let me remind you, was an Italian from Genoa, so he would give his blessing for his ancestral homeland to be better off by joining Switzerland. The Swiss, however, wouldn't be so enthusiastic about this, as if they were to annex Italy, they would become Italian and Catholic majority, which would be opposed by the Germans and French living in Switzerland. As such, I think that Switzerland would only agree to take Lombardy Veneto, exchange parts of Tyrol for Vorarlberg with Austria and annex Luxembourg. This way there would be more Germans as to balance out the expansion of the Italians. For the French, I don't think that the Swiss would want to add any more of their territories, like the Annecy province for example, mostly because French people threw in Switzerland, like everywhere they have went. Generally speaking, as a rule of thumb, the less French people you have, the more stable the country. I mean, just look at Belgium, they're about 50% French, and this is honestly sad. Anyways, what happens to the rest of Italy? Well, I think that the Papal States would get reformed, but this would be far from the only thing that would be happening. With America being led by Christopher Columbus' artificial intelligence, they would become rather expansionist and colonialist, so I can see them to take parts of Italy, all of their colonies including Libya. Because the Americans don't want to share a border with the French, I think that Tunisia would be given to Switzerland Veneto as compensation, which I find as very realistic and plausible. Some historians debate whether this would happen. Personally, I asked ChatGPT and it confirmed that this was extremely realistic. Next up, what would happen in Europe? Well, my editor spent about 12 hours of unpaid work to make a secret map of Europe regarding the future of the world. I'm just going to delete it and not show it to you, so this is his work wasted, lol. #capitalism. Anyways, with Switzerland expanding so much, naturally Germany would want to do the same. I think that they would proclaim the restoration of the Holy Roman Empire into the 1930s. The world would start to get a lot more chaotic and would begin to disintegrate very fast. The Balkans would be at war as a random example, or the Middle East, but you know this is to be expected, so nothing new or nothing interesting. In these areas there would be only 17 wars in this year, which historians would consider as a very peaceful period. What I find as really interesting is the situation in Asia. Japan would be looking to expand into China, but they would be lacking the legitimacy to do so. As such, they would ask Green Ukraine to do it for them, which they would do by taking out Manchuria and Inner Mongolia, becoming a Japanese puppet. Britain would respond to this by taking out Tibet, which may seem unrealistic, but come on, of course the British would want to expand and colonize. This is important as the Chinese civil war would be raging on, meaning that Green Ukraine is powerful enough to take advantage of this, not only intervening here but also in the Spanish Civil War and the Middle Eastern politics, helping to Iraqi farmers settle a land dispute. I think that Green Ukraine, seeing no resistance in being backed by Japan, would continue encroaching on the Chinese territory. The Soviet Union is still fighting a civil war as well, so Green Ukraine would also snatch some territories from them. Back to America, nobody would really care about Green Ukraine taking parts of China and exploiting their civil war. Literally nobody would care, except for one person from Florida that is rather crazy. As such, he would go to what used to be the Republic of West Florida and declare the Republic of Florida man, with himself in charge. Christopher Columbus' AI would allow for this to happen, seeing this as a way to get all of the crazy people out of his country, and as such North Dakota would be depopulated. New Jersey likely would merge with New York as to cope with this crisis. As the years go on, the world would want to fight a world war, but how would it start? Well, first up you have Austria that had lost so much territory, and I think that they would be seeking revenge. Not against Switzerland of course, they had agreed on border transfers. Austria would instead target Germany. The Austrians would be led by a failed painter who in 1934 would try to unite with Germany, but this would be a total failure. The Austrian painter would need a lot more support in Germany in order to achieve his goal. Luckily for him, a certain someone would come in to save the day and make all of his dreams come true. Do you want to guess as to who this person would be? Well, earlier I mentioned that Stalin would be born in American Georgia. However, an African-American couple would be sent to European Georgia as to complete the population transfer. This African-American couple would eventually give birth to Kanye West, who historically was born in Atlanta, Georgia, but now would be born in Tbilisi, Georgia. Kanye West would eventually rise the ranks in the Soviet Union, led by Leonel Trotsky. The thing is that Trotsky and Kanye West would have some political differences. Trotsky would want a permanent revolution and to make the whole world go communist. But you are smart and already know this. Kanye West on the other hand loves Hitler. In fact, he said it himself, multiple times, for many years, constantly. So they would have a political disagreement, leading to Kanye West to be exiled from the Soviet Union. He would go to Turkey, which I mean, why would anybody want to stay there? As such, Kanye West would likely move again to a place that is somehow even worse than Turkey, and this is France. As such, Kanye West would make his way over to Paris and begin his political career. He would constantly advocate in favor of Hitler and that France would pursue a friendly foreign policy with the Holy Roman Empire, i.e. Germany. It may sound highly unrealistic, however I think that all of the pieces are here for France to bless Austria to annex Germany in 1938. Hitler as a thank you would endorse Kanye West. Oh god, this video is getting demonetized, I already know it. Anyways, Austria would want to reform their empire, and as such they would invite the Habsburgs to run the country once again. Now there is one thing that you should know about the House of Habsburg. They originated from Switzerland, which is very based. Wait, there are actually two things that you should know about them, and this is that in the 1400s they had an extreme rivalry with the House of Luxembourg. Now with Austria taking Germany, they can finally end this rivalry by annexing Luxembourg and getting to rule the Holy Roman Empire undisputed. The world wouldn't really care about the Austrians annexing Luxembourg, everybody would stay silent, except for two people, the Florida man and the President of Mexico, who would condemn Hitler. Now let us take a look at America. With the Florida men now having their own country, the United States would actually prosper economically, and the Christopher Columbus AI would be improved even more. Originally, it was unpopular as America was very conservative and having an AI president was unthinkable. However, the AI president quickly becomes popular. This is because to literally every political question that he gets asked, he replies with something about discovering a new continent, enslaving people and spreading Christianity. The Americans love this. Christopher Columbus promises that there is an undiscovered continent that would bring immense riches to America, so the people must follow his lead. There is one problem however, and this is Poland. Austria and the Soviet Union don't really like it existing, as Poland used to be a former territory of both. So I think that they would invade and annex the country according to the Molotov cocktail secret protocols, held in the mansion of Kanye West in Paris. As he is pro-Hitler, he would support the Austrians very much, which would get them more territory looking like so. The thing is that France isn't doing too well themselves. Kanye West had done a lot to help out his best friend in Austria, however not too much to help out the local Frenchman. As such, he would decide to do something. Kanye West would promise to restore the Western Roman Empire, proclaiming himself as Emperor West I. Historians disagree on whether Kanye West restoring the Roman Empire was inevitable, but I tend to think that this would happen. His first executive order would be to annex Belgium, however he would not touch the Swiss as they would be too powerful for now, even for the Kanye Western Roman Empire. As such, they would focus on other weaker microstates like San Marino in between France and Germany, but also Monaco, located between France and Spain, all of which would be annexed. Another microstate that would be annexed would be Spain. This is due to the Spanish Civil War and the Spanish Republicans. So what about the Republicans? Well, they're not fans of Kanye West and his music. On the other hand, the Spanish nationalists, just like Kanye West, also love Hitler, and luckily for the Kanye West Roman Empire, the nationalists were winning the Civil War. I think that just like historically on the 1st of April 1939, that the nationalists would win in Spain, so they would be annexed into the Kanye West Roman Empire. Portugal, everybody's favorite Balkan country, would also be annexed. Australia would not be spared, due to the nation's name sounding very similar to that of Austria, led by Hitler, which Kanye West very much loves. This would be the new status quo of the world as of now. One thing you should know about Hitler is that he hated the Soviet Union, so I can see him to invade a country, while Britain would support Trotsky in the war. As such, there is a Second World War. Austria initiates Operation Vesirubung as to take out Scandinavia, their former core territory, but also have a larger front with the Soviet Union. After the fall of Poland, there would be a large phony war, where not a lot would be happening. America, on the other hand, is ready to deliver some freedom to the world. Christopher Columbus had promised a new continent to colonize, and Europe being at war would be ripe for the taking. So America would literally declare war on everyone, despite none of these countries having oil. Hey look, Romania, boom, it's America baby. This would serve as a nice launching pad to the west of Europe. The Kanye West Roman Empire had just been invaded by America, so they would have to think of a way on how to come on top. As such, while this may be highly unrealistic and not plausible, not to mention it's unrealistic and shouldn't be taken seriously, just like any of my other videos that are also unrealistic, here is what I dare to think. Please don't punish me in the comment section for having free will. I think that the Kanye West Roman Empire would align itself with Hitler's Austria as to capitulate Britain and restore the proper West Roman Empire, while the Soviet Union led by Leonid Trotsky would basically implode due to lack of support and be colonized by America. In the meantime, Green Ukraine would manage to break free from Japan, taking Korea and Taiwan in the process. With all the great powers now being at war and distracted, I think that Green Ukraine would eventually annex all of China, ending their civil war and uniting all the Ukrainian speakers. Islam would also become the new religion of this new country, while Mexican song would become the new state anthem. #diversity. Anyways, America would be at war with the world. They would be winning in some places, but the Hitler-Kanye West coalition would prove to be too strong. Many would question the legitimacy of the AI president and if they can trust him. One such person would be Joseph Stalin, this time being born in Atlanta, Georgia, which had to happen so Trotsky would be in charge of the Soviet Union and Kanye West is born in Europe in the first place. I don't find it as unreasonable that Stalin would manage to gather supporters as to overthrow the AI president Christopher Columbus and through the United States of America, while being at war with the Kanye West Roman Empire. As you can see, these would be dire times for America, but Stalin can fix it. With the Gulag system, he would create many similar republics like the Florida Man, where he would purge all of his political opponents. The people would not be happy with the ongoing war, so Stalin, seeking to distract them, would launch several rockets into space, and eventually a Florida Man would be strapped to one of them. The rocket would launch and eventually land on the moon. Under the leadership and guidance of Comrade Joseph Stalin, America would win the space race while fighting in the Second World War. So how does the war end? Well, Switzerland Veneto is the only major power not currently at war, and everyone else seems to be run by morons. I think it's fair to assume that the Swiss would enter the war and annex the entire European continent due to their extreme superiority. Well, maybe not the entire continent, just the important areas that actually matter. The rest is ungovernable anyways, so why take it? As such, if Hungary had kept their Pre-Trianon borders, this would clearly lead to Switzerland controlling Europe, Green Ukraine uniting China, Kanye West restoring the Roman Empire, AI Christopher Columbus ruling America but being replaced by Joseph Stalin that would win the space race. And just like any good alternate history, I hadn't even once mentioned South America. As you see, this is why the Treaty of Trianon was necessary for world stability. In a realistic scenario where Hungary gets their imperial borders, I think that this would be the outcome, absolute and utter chaos. This is why Hungary being punished so much after the First World War was very important, and if you ever see a Hungarian wanting to restore their past glory, make sure to send them this video because they're likely very uneducated, and don't know that this would lead to the end of the world. Check out this video about Operation Vesirubung failing, seriously it's a good one. Thank you for watching and I hope to see you there, goodbye.